If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
I'll be here to hear what's on your mind.
As an adult, kids want to know you're listening to them, but they also want to listen to you. When it comes to alcohol, they want to know your expectations and how and why to avoid underage drinking. Talking early and often about it in everyday conversations reinforces your message and keeps lines of communication open. For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
I'll be by your side.
Now the dark days are done and the bright days are here. My sunny one shines so sincere. Sunny one so true. I love you.
Thank you, Doc. Our next guest is one of those rare talents who has something to say and can say it funny. He's a writer-performer on the new Laugh-In and one of the most popular, outspoken, and entertaining personalities on the local news here in Los Angeles. He's won a half a dozen Emmys as a film critic and host of his own shows. Let's welcome Mr. John Barbour, right over there.
Thank you. That was first the beautiful singing voice of Sarita, then the magnificent speaking voice of Frank Sinatra. And this is John Barbour in Las Vegas. Welcome to John Barbour's World. It's Thursday, January 14th. Again, not my regular time, and I'm a little late because we are live, technical problems. But once again, we're doing this early because in a very few minutes, we're going to meet a fabulous triple threat talent and politically involved man I've wanted to talk to ever since meeting him over 2 years ago. This show will also be rerun at its regular time, 5 p.m. Pacific time, Monday night. How nice. There were 3 winners of last night's Powerball. I only hope these winners do not consume their good luck as found fruit for themselves, but use it as seeds for others. How pathetic, though, that millions of Americans whose only hope to survive now is getting into a long lottery breadline. And I'm a little sad today because of the death of Alan Rickman, a wonderful actor in Harry Potter. But now I'm going to tell you a quick short story about how luck can be as important to your life as the oxygen you breathe. It's about an actor, moi. There are 3 professions I admire most. They are comics, writers, and actors. Comics, because they are the bravest, standing alone as in a firing squad, avoiding sudden death with their own wit. Second, writers. There's little harder than sitting alone, staring at a blank page, wondering what to put there, and does it really matter? And third is, God love them, actors. Those searching souls who hope to live a better real life by playing in a make-believe one, but always facing the horrible fact their fate is in other hands, as you will hear. I was fortunately quite successful in 2 of these fields. Success in acting, well, I did a lot, avoided me. Believe it or not, I turned down terrific parts in Rocky and Alan Pakula's great Parallax View as the senator who gets shot, because as a critic at the time, I felt it was a conflict of interest. Standards which no longer exist in Hollywood or America today. But fame in this field avoided me, and I had no choice. Quickly, I'll tell you why. Chris Hayward, co-creator of The Munsters, and the guy who saved Barney Miller from oblivion, saw me as a comic on the Merv Griffin Show. At the time, he and his partner, Alan Burns, were creating a sitcom for ABC called Ace of the Mounties. ABC, of course, wanted the star, Bob Newhart, but he declined. And Chris said, hey, I found this Canadian kid, John Barbour, who resembles Newhart. I'd like to test him. ABC said no. So Chris called me the next day and said, hey, Johnny, we're testing German Shepherds to be Ace's best friend. Do you mind coming over here and walking a dog? And I said, sure, not at all. But ABC said, forget the dog, forget the project, forget the test, we're passing. So Chris called with better news the next day. His friend, Fred de Cordova, who later became Johnny Carson's producer, was committed by ABC to do a sitcom, a takeoff on Peter Sellers' Inspector Clouseau called Manly and the Mob. It was written by Jerry Gardner and Dee Caruso, who at the time were writing jokes for John Kennedy, so they wanted the show. So Chris recommended me, told me to meet Freddie. Freddie liked me, said he'd test me. He said, but I would go on the end of a list that he was compiling with 31 other actors, including George Carlin and Barbra Streisand's hubby, Elliot Gould. All 31 bombed. Well, Freddie called depressed to give me my test time. I said, Mr. de Cordova, please forgive me, but the problem with your test script is that it's not funny. I said, Sellers Clouseau was a physical klutz. There's no hint of that in your script, so do you mind if I invent a little before I speak? He said, whatever, kid. So I did. Before I spoke the first line, sitting at my desk, I did some physical shtick like Clouseau. The crew laughed, and I was a hit. Next day, Freddie calls thrilled, but with bad news. ABC loved the test, is going ahead with the show, but not with me. With Paul Lynde from Hollywood Squares, I would get the third lead. Well, I told Freddie, hey, Freddie, listen, America's not ready for a homosexual lead yet. You know, he'd be great as the gangster's sidekick. Well, he got the lead, and of course it died. When it was over, I called Freddie back and said, Freddie, why on earth did ABC have me on that long list of 32 people to test anyway? He said, Johnny, they left you there because they didn't know you, so they had nothing against you. But now they do know you. You're a heterosexual. So that's when I gave up acting. But I and you are glad my guest did not. He has been enormously successful and admired in all three fields. A brilliant comic I used to watch all the time at the Improv in Los Angeles. Author of a wonderfully informative best-selling series of books, all of which I have, including Hit List and Dead Wrong, about the subjects I love. But he's best known to you as John Munch, whom he has portrayed perfectly for over 20 years in Homicide, Life on the Streets, and Law and Order. Live from Paris, the city I love, the man I love, Richard Belzer. Richard, thank you so much for being here.
Bonjour, mon ami.
Bonjour, bonjour. What time is it in Paris?
It's getting near 9 o'clock.
Well, thank you so much for staying up.
I'm not in Paris. I'm in a little remote village that no one ever heard of.
In that little remote village that you live, first of all, why did you pick there to live and not in America? And secondly, were you there in that remote village when the Paris attacks occurred a few weeks ago?
Yes. We got the house. My wife visited some friends here in the late 80s, and there were these beautiful old mill houses and stone houses that were centuries old that were going for ridiculously low prices. And so I had made a legal settlement and had some money. So my wife found a house in this village. It's a 800 or 900-year-old walnut oil mill that's on land where two rivers meet. There's a waterfall behind it. And it's just the most idyllic place. And the day-to-day living in France, the French country living lifestyle is the best on earth. It's all about food and family and hard work, and I'm lucky to be in the area I was in. when I first moved here, people were wondering why France, and they were talking about World War II, and it turns out the area that my house is in was a big bastion of resistance fighters, and also they hid Jews here. And the woman we bought our house from hid a Jewish man for 2 years during the war.
How wonderful! And
so there's a lot of history to the house and the village. But you asked why I live. Well, I've been working for 2 decades or plus, and I just started doing less episodes, and then I came here about 2 years ago and worked on a couple of books, and I'm just country gentleman, and doing a lot of reading and research and about what we're all interested in.
In the little area that you live, what was the reaction? And your reaction and your reading to the attacks that went on in Paris, because I heard that the same. Excuse me, Richard. I heard the same thing happened in Paris as happened in Washington D.C. when John Kennedy was shot, and that's that all the telephone service was cut down. Is that true?
I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't think that would have any. If there was any kind of conspiracy, which I'm not certain of, I don't think that would play a part in it. This was obviously the whole country was just, we're still recovering from the murder of those cartoons,
Oh yeah,
Charlie Hebdo, Je suis Charlie. The country is still on edge about that, and then this happened. So it's really, really hard. Fortunately, I'm far from Paris, so people here are mostly farmers, and they're cognizant of what went on. But people in Paris are much more afraid, and Paris is the biggest tourist attraction on earth, and I'm sure that's being affected too. But the whole thing is very fishy. Anyway,
well, you said you bought the home with a lawsuit settlement. Was that the settlement that came about as a result of your involvement with a wrestler? I think you were demonstrating something on a television
show.
Yes,
Hulk Hogan almost killed me on my live talk show in 1985.
What happened?
What an asshole. What a steroid monster. He dropped me, he rendered me unconscious and then dropped me to the floor, and it split my head open. I had 9 stitches. I was in the hospital. And so, I sued him, and here I am in France.
well, the question was, he wouldn't have done that, obviously, unless you guys were sort of demonstrating something. When you guys got to court, did he say, well, Richard asked me to demonstrate and something went wrong?
No, it was such a malicious thing, and fortunately it was live, so everybody could see that, that I was a comedian. I was clowning around, and here this guy just almost kills me. Well, you know what that's like, Ken.
Oh, my God, yes. And, I'll tell you, when I was telling my little story about my experience with Manley and the mob and why I decided, oh, my God, I don't want my life to be determined by somebody who says I should have brown eyes or I should be 2 inches taller. So I decided I would get into stand-up. And in reading about you, I came across this wonderful story by Barry Levinson, who said that you weren't quite that good when you auditioned for John.
That was what he said at a roast. That was a joke.
Oh, my gosh. Well, it reads on the Internet as though it's not a joke.
No, it's a joke. I was great in the first how do you think I got the fucking part? Pardon my French. I'm sorry.
Listen, all right, listen.
You think he'd hire me if I was bad 3 times in a row?
No, never.
First of all, he wouldn't have brought me back if I was bad the first time. That doesn't happen in the business.
Barry is such a good writer-director, so I couldn't but believe that was entirely possible, that he would be that patient with you unless he loved you as a person and loved you as a comic. Now, why did you start out, or why did you become a comic? Because I think originally you wanted to be a journalist, didn't you?
Yeah, I was a journalist. I was a reporter, and then kind of on a dare from one of my wives, there was an ad in the Village Voice to wanted funny, intelligent actors and actresses for this new satirical show. It was called Groove Tube.
Oh, I
which is
remember
what
that.
Saturday Night Live is based on Groove Tube.
Yes.
It was it was an underground television show that was on 3 black and white monitors in a 90-seat theater in New York, and we did parodies of movies and news and commercials, and people paid $3 to come in and see it. And so that was before cable. That was like in the early 70s. But when I was doing that, I kind of got the courage to do stand-up because, I was always funny, but kind of terrified to go on stage. And then I finally did. And
how old were you when you did that? And do you remember any of the material you did, any of the lines that you did?
Of course, I still do the same act. No, I'm kidding.
Like Henny Youngman, right? There was that great joke about Henny Youngman. I heard it at a roast of the Friars one night. If you heckle Henny Youngman, he has to stop and go back and start at the beginning.
Yeah, I'd walk out on you. One time I was booked to work with him, and he said, "What is this, a contest?" He didn't want another comic on the bill.
Oh, how wonderful. How wonderful. And those guys were so glorious. I mean, all of them. Shecky Green and Alan Key.
Yeah, speaking of those guys, Jerry Lewis is going to be 90 in March.
Oh, my goodness, great. Aren't you writing a book with him or about him?
Yeah, I'm writing a book with him, and on April 8th, he's being honored at this big event in New York City at the Pierre Hotel. There's going to be a big event that I'll be hosting.
Oh, how wonderful. Good for you. That is absolutely terrific. I remember his very first appearance with Dean Martin in a film called My Friend Irma. I was just a kid.
That's right.
And I imitated him for months and months. I was a big hit for months and months. It was just wonderful. Now, you ended up doing something that I did. Used to do warm-ups for sitcoms in Hollywood because that's where I lived. But I think you did the warm-up for Saturday Night Live?
Yes, I did. And I can say it now because it was so many years ago, that some of the cast members were a little upset because I was so funny before the show that they didn't want me to do the warm-ups anymore.
Oh, my God. How awful. And how...
I know. Well, John Belushi was not one of them.
Oh, thank
I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, thank
you.
John... How about Dan? How about Dan? How was Dan? Was he nice to you?
Oh, yeah. Danny was great. They were all great, but a couple of them had some problems. John actually... I did a show with John, the Lampoon show off Broadway. Me, John, Billy, Gilda, and John found out I wasn't making as much as the rest of the cast, and he threatened to quit until I got the raise. That's the kind of guy he was, John Belushi.
How sweet is that? What was it that happened in your life that you think is probably one of the most fortunate moments? Because I don't imagine that you were probably planning on becoming an actor and eventually a television star. And I've always felt that the best things in life happen by accident, while all the disasters are so well planned, like the opening of this show. But what was it that you think changed your life from comic to...
Aside from my wife?
Yes. Well said.
No. Let's see. Well, I'd have to say that... I was making money and successful before I did Homicide. I was in my 40s, and I wasn't up for the part. And somehow, I forget, somebody, Barry, had seen me. Oh, Barry Levinson heard me on the Howard Stern show when he was driving to the studio while they were casting Homicide. And he said, well, let's bring Richard in. And he didn't know if I was an actor or not. He knew me through Robin Williams, my buddy. So I came in and they gave me a script to look at, but I couldn't take it off the lot because of whatever reason. So they said, go in that room over there and study this stuff, and then when you're ready, well, you know. So I go in this room, and I see in the room is a big TV monitor and a VHS player with all these tapes stacked up. And on the tapes it says Munch, Munch, Munch. There's all these actors who had auditioned.
Oh, my.
So I open the door and I look out like Spy vs. Spy, you know, in that magazine. I look out,
Yes.
close the door, and I start watching these other actors audition for the part. And it was fascinating because, and some of them were famous. I don't want to name anybody, but some of them were famous. But all of them played it the same way. They played it like, you know, the archetypical tough cop, and you know, tough and stern and humorless and, you know, grim, and each one of them made that choice. So the way I read the scene, I read the guy as being kind of like crazy and not clinically, but just a wild guy who took off his shoe during the interrogation and yelled at the suspect. What do you want Larry King? You think I'm Montel Williams? I'm not Montel Williams. You know, and just yelling at this guy. And, you know, I said, you don't like my hair? I took off my shoe. I did all this stuff. And I could see Barry Levinson, you know, his eyes lit up. And he said, you got to, you know, he said, okay, I want you to learn these other scenes. So he did, in fact, bring me back 3 times.
Oh, my
but it was all to learn more of this, you know. So then I get a call and from my then manager who said, you got the part. And I said, no, that's great. And I wasn't excited because I couldn't believe it on some level. He said, you got to get champagne. You got the part. And I said, all right, you know, and it sunk in, obviously. And then I found out from Tom Fontana, the main writer and creator of the show with Barry, that when they had the whole cast of the show, there were 9 of us. 8 of them were cast, and they couldn't find a Munch. They were looking for the Munch character, and they couldn't find. Finally, they got me. So Tom calls up NBC and says, "We got our Munch." And they said, "Great, who is it?" And they said, "Richard Belzer." And there was dead silence on the other end of the line for like a minute.
I love it.
And they said, "Oh, well, we were hoping for a Jason Priestley in like a hunk type." And Tom said, "Well, Barry wants Richard." And they said, "Well, Richard has to come up, you know, to the network and meet with all the executives and everything, you know." And Tom said, "No, he doesn't. Barry wants Richard. He doesn't have to go up there."
Oh, my
and I
God.
Said,
good for him.
And I said, "Okay." Isn't that wild?
Oh, that is so fabulous. A couple of things. You mentioned I Spy. The creator of that is Sergio Aragonés from Ad Magazine, was my friend for years and years.
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned your friendship with Robin Williams. I did the revival of Laugh-In on NBC as their critic.
I recall.
And one of their writers, and that was the show that introduced Robin. Now, tell me something.
That's right.
The man was so brilliant. He was up there with Jonathan Winters, you know, just an absolute ad-lib comic genius. You didn't have to write material from him. But he said the saddest thing before he died. He said there's the only thing worse than being alone is being with somebody who makes you feel alone.
Wow, yes.
That could have only been a reflection of his relationship with his wife. I don't care what his wife says now. That's what that says. Why do you think he would have done such a thing to himself?
Because he had a disease that would have deteriorated his mental ability and robbed him of the very thing, his gifts. And I think that, I'm just speculating, but I think that terrorized him, the fact that he'd be losing his mental faculties. And, you know, I think that
Richard, that probably is undoubtedly true. But why would he do it in such a gruesome manner? God.
Well, that's what made me not talk to anybody for a month. Because my brother had just committed suicide.
Oh,
Jesus. A week before Robin.
Why?
So he jumped out of a window my
Did you
brother,
have-
my
did-
older brother.
Did you have any?
So, you know, I was recovering from that, and then I get the call on Robin.
Oh, Jesus.
So, but you know, the way he did it, to me, just shows me how much pain he was in and how disoriented he was. And, you know, because there were marks on his wrist with a dull knife, and then of course, you know, the asphyxiation. I think he was just so, I don't know, who knows what kind of medication he was on also, and what that was doing to the chemistry of, you know, his hormones and brain chemistry, you know. So I don't know what medication he was on.
It is interesting that you mentioned medication because, you know, a lot of this is always suppressed, but a number of these mass shootings and a number of suicides of the not-so-famous are the result of people taking these psychiatric drugs. And because the pharmaceuticals advertise billions on television, the newscasts never report these stories. But in the case, I don't want to bring it up, but I'm sort of compelled to, Richard. Did you have any idea that your brother was as depressed as he was?
Yes, not to that degree. But his wife had died like a year before that. So he was in a depression about her, and you know, so after she went, he was kind of like helpless.
Well, you know, Richard, this is going to be bizarre. I mean, I've lived decades and decades, and I must tell you, I have known more people who have committed suicide than have died of natural causes. One of my very, very best friends when I first went to Hollywood as a runaway and a struggling actor was a fellow named Lenny in his early 40s, a brilliant Jew who was a jeweler.
What was his name?
His name was Lenny, and he was a brilliant jeweler and a Jew. He used to educate me about Judaism, and I loved listening to his stories about Sholem Aleichem and all of the rest of it. And I'm an uninformed kid, and I'm a runaway, and I'm down there. His wife had committed suicide a year early, and I used to go and see him in his shop on Hollywood Boulevard right across from Edmund's bookstore and spend hours just sitting and talking to him and watching him do his work. He was like my adopted father. And then one day I walked in there, and he had blown his brains out over a watch that he'd been fixing, and he left the suicide note that just said, "I'll see you soon." But gee, you know, I can't understand it. It's like an epidemic, and it's an epidemic amongst children too. Anyway, I don't want to get into that.
Well, one more thing, I just want to say that a lot of times a suicidal person commits suicide because an aspect of their life is messed up, not their whole life. And sometimes one thing can poison and overpower everything else, like losing a spouse or, you know, a job or something. And, you know, just, well.
Well, now you become John Munch, which is a perfect name for you, Munchkin. I mean, it is such,
I lucked out on that one.
It is such a perfect name. So now you start out as a journalist, you go through your struggling life as a successful comedian, you become this accidental, wonderful actor on Law and Order and Life in the Streets. Now you go back to your first love, which was journalism. What was the first book you wrote, and why did you write it?
I wrote a satirical book called How to Be a Stand-Up Comic. Yes. Which was satirical but had real advice in it. And then years later, in 1999, I released a book called UFOs, JFK, and Elvis. Conspiracy you don't have to be crazy to believe. And that then I wrote Melancholy Baby and Satin Doll. No. And then I wrote, what do you call it? What did I write? I wrote Dead Wrong, which was about Marilyn Monroe, Malcolm X, and Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy, and how their crimes were covered up. Those murders were
then Hit List?
Clearly covered up.
Hit List?
Hit List is a book with 50 of the most suspicious deaths in and around the Kennedy assassination.
Well, I must tell you, Richard, you are an absolute joy and an absolute treasure. And one of my regrets was that I never got to see you and your wonderful daughter and your little dog more often at Musso Frank's, my very favorite restaurant in Hollywood Boulevard.
Well, next time I'm in the country, we'll get together.
Well, we certainly will, and no matter where you are...
And you have an open invitation to visit here in France, by the way.
Well, thank you very much.
Plenty of room.
I know, but I don't think my wife would let me go to France. She'd be too scared.
No, with your wife.
Oh,
come on.
Yeah, that's not it. She might be a little nervous. She would not want to go to Paris after what happened to Paris. So we'll end up where
you go to this little, come to where I live, where there's, just Jew lovers.
that's where we would be. If people want to learn more about you, read more about you, where can they go?
My Twitter account is Mr. Belzer.
Right.
And if you just Google my name, you'll see all the different ways you can go on my just put my name on any computer and Google it, and then you'll see my website and all the different things that are on there.
Well, I want to thank...
There's a lot of material on there from my act, and there's a lot of great stuff on there.
Well, there certainly is, and there's a lot more great stuff to come. You will be...
So let's do this again, whenever you're ready.
Let's do it shortly after you host the event for Jerry Lewis, who once called Tom Snyder and told Tom Snyder to get me fired after I reviewed him one day. And I will tell you about that review. As a matter of fact, if you're writing a book about him, you call me and I will tell you the story. I will also tell you the story behind how he got to do the telethons. The story.
Oh, wow.
And
can I call you next week?
I'll tell you, you can call me next week. I have just spent 5 laborious years trying to do my own autobiography. It's called Your Mother's Not a Virgin. And my agent said it's the best title he'd ever heard. He just hopes the insides are better. I told the story about how he actually got to do the telethon because Norman Lear and his partner used to do the Colgate Comedy Hour, which was where he and Dean used to perform all the time, and where they accidentally did a 1-hour telethon. Anyway, after I saw one of Jerry's specials, I decimated. I don't want to go into that. I decimated him on the air, and he called me and cursed me out, and he called Snyder, tried to get me fired. Anyway, and I had been invited to speak at the Performers Synagogue in Beverly Hills as one of the speakers after what I had done about Munich. And then when I did this thing about Jerry, they canceled me. But in any event, he called and told me the story of how it happened. I only told it in my book. I had never told it publicly, but I will tell you. So if you want to call me next week or...
Yeah, I'll call you next week.
Because Jerry will remember my dreadful review of him, honestly. Anyway, you would always receive a very favorable review. And if you've screwed up a little as an actor, I would just say you're the most terrific man in the world anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. My love to your wife.
Thank you. My love to you, your wife, and your daughter. And we'll talk to you very, very shortly. Thanks again, Richard. Have a great
day. Okay, John.
You're listening to BBS Radio. If it's not mainstream, it's on bbsradio.com.
Hi, I'm Richard Belzer. This is the great BBS Radio.
Thank you for that smile upon your face. Oh, Sunny.
Hi, this is John Barbour. You may remember me as the co-host, producer, and creator of Real People, America's first reality show, or most recently as the writer-director of what's been called the definitive documentary on JFK's murder, The Last Word on the Assassination. Now I'm doing a show every other Monday from 5 to 6 Pacific Time on BBS. You'll hear provocative views, unreported news, and film reviews from me with outstanding guests and you. Join me on John Barbour's World.
Those of you who have an ongoing interest in the JFK assassination might want to know about this. TV producer John Barbour. He put together a dream team of JFK researchers, including Coast regular Jim Mars and world-class JFK writers Dick Russell and Joan Mellon. They all got together at UNLV in front of a live audience. They had a screening of Barbour's terrific and I'd say historic film based on interviews with prosecutor Jim Garrison of New Orleans. And then after the film was shown, the experts all talked about the latest JFK theories and evidence. It's now out on a DVD. Terrific stuff. I'm George Knapp, Coast to Coast AM.
Thank you. Welcome back to John Barbour's World, and thanks again to George Knapp for that wonderful unsolicited review about the last word on the assassination. You go to Amazon, you Google it, you'll see 100 other great unsolicited reviews. Also, if you're in the mood for something funny or witty or something maybe that'll upset you and make you angry, you'll find John Barbour's first Facebook book, Uncensored, and thanks to Richard Belzer for the wonderful forward to that little book. And also, you can go to John Barbour's World, click on the videos, and view for nothing John Barbour's last word on the Garrison tapes, which turns out to be an unmeant promo for part 2 of the Garrison tapes, which we're going to make later this year, and it's called The American Media and the Second Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But right now, my right arm, I certainly could not do or imagine this show without him, is the author and founder of News Vandal, by far the best researched, best written, easiest to read, most objective newsletter in America, which I forward to all of my friends. Joe Satilli. Joe, welcome to the show.
How about the great Richard Belzer?
Wasn't he wonderful?
Yeah, he's great. And when as you know, John, from our many conversations off air, I am a big fan of comedy. I've been a comedy head ever since I was a child, and I do remember Belzer. He's one of those comics who stood out. He not only had a shtick, he had that great deadpan delivery. He always had the dark glasses on. I remember him with a cigarette and just always wearing a sort of a black suit. And he just a wonderful approach to comedy that stood out from many of the others at the turn of the 70s into the 80s. And it's always great to see people get a second or third career, as you talked about in your open, about the 3 elements of a career that you've pursued in your life, and I think all quite successfully, frankly. But that's I guess I'm prejudiced. But here's Belzer, who remade himself for a whole new generation of people who probably don't really even know of him as a stand-up comedian.
Oh, they unquestionably don't, and so they should click on his name and go watch some of this stuff, because the best thing about his humor was it was humorous as well as human, and that always makes you laugh. And I have such an affinity and affection. You call it a comic head. I guess I'm a comic junkie too, not just because I was one, but because I admired them. I remember the one joke that Bob Hope did on the radio when I was a kid. It used to be, this is Bob broadcasting from Fort Ode Hope, and he was always brought by Pepsodent toothpaste. There was one line he did that was the only line for what he was ever censored for. I was about 8 or 9, and I still remember it. He said, "Did you hear about this girl who was sewing and accidentally swallowed the needle, but didn't feel the prick till she was 16? and they cut him off the air.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. They were all vaudevillians, and that's where this all goes back to, right? And it was bawdy, and it was wonderful, and really, if you go back and look at some of the comic greats like Milton Berle and Hope, if you start to listen to them differently, or even George Burns, you find that there are these subtle little innuendos in and out of everything. And in a sense, comedy was even more of an art form when the censors were looking over your shoulder, because you had to find intriguing ways of telling the joke through double and triple entendres that, you could get past the censors. But we're sort of going far afield because, there's maybe one of the reasons why stand-up comedy has, in a sense, waned a little bit over the last 20 years is because of politics. There's no need for stand-up comedy when you have the political system.
One of the lines I did, when I was on with Sinatra, Francis introduced me at the top of the show, was that as a comedian, we no longer have to write jokes to get laughs. All we have to do is quote them. And it got an ovation. I mean, even that was even back then. But what it was, you said, the way in which they had to do everything subtly. It's like the greatest love scenes in movies are those where they're not graphic. They just sort of hint at it and let your imagination create the pictures in your mind. And sometimes I remember when Sputnik went up, and I was living next door to a fellow named Mort Lachman, who was Bob Hope's head writer, and he wrote this great line for Bob Hope. And the line was, it just goes to prove that Russia's German scientists are better than our German scientists. And to Bob Hope's credit, he called Mort Saul, and he said, Mort, this is not my kind of joke. Would you like to have it? So he gave it to Mort Saul, and Mort Saul has forever been taking credit for it, but it was written by Mort Lachman, who was Bob Hope's head writer. Ask me about comedy stuff. I know everything.
Well, no, and look, we could talk about it because Mort Saul was one of the first comedians I saw as a child. I don't know if what it was on. He was appearing on some variety show. My first television memory, I probably was 3, was watching the Flip Wilson show.
Geraldine.
Yes. Well, not just Geraldine, the full range of what he was able to do. And he would come out and do that sort of that opening monologue. He was so incredible and so incredibly talented, and has actually been forgotten woefully.
Yes, he has. Sadly, he has.
Despite his gifts. And I think, Mort Saul appeared on one of those, and he had that bite that really attracted me early on. And also, a guy who I came to know later was Tom Lehrer, who was...
Oh, I love Tom. He has been forgotten. And that talent has been forgotten. You know what we should do one day, Joe, on the show? Find your favorite Tom Lehrer song, and we'll play it. They are so clever and so funny.
Well, he's got the one about Werner von Braun, right? Didn't he?
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
Yes, he has.
But this is why I was, segueing from the Sputnik joke with Mort Saul. It's what comedians do is provide a service. They allow you to hear the truth in ways that are sideways to how you are looking at things. So that perpendicular attack on your sensibilities allows you to see something new. And that's where you get the laugh, is from the sideways. That's what the punchline is, right? You're going down one direction and you get punched from the side, and that's what causes you to laugh.
It's been that way from Mark Twain to Will Rogers to Bob Hope to Mort Saul. It is maybe a little bit George Carlin, a little bit Lenny Bruce, certainly Bill Hicks, but there is no one in the country today that can stand on a stage and give you that information and make you laugh. It does not exist anymore. Wit has vanished from the American scene.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the rise of irony. Irony is a big part of what drives reality television, also voyeurism. And in a sense, there's a point at which the sensibilities can no longer be shocked.
That's right.
And what's interesting, to bring this back to what's going on in the world, I think this is one of the things that Trump is using, is that everything that he has said, that the establishment has said, well, here it is. He called John McCain a loser because he was captured. This is a great war hero. Everything. I mean, you can't imagine that. John, can you imagine at any time in your life, a major candidate from one of the two parties attacking a war hero as being a loser because he got captured and not having his candidacy?
It happened to John Kerry when they swift boated him.
That's right. So it can't. Well, yeah, but that was a much more subtle attack. If
yes, true.
George W. Bush didn't say, well, John Kerry's a loser, he got captured, that would have George W. Bush would have been toast. But we're in this period now, this sort of post-shock period. I mean, it's just a few years ago that Janet Jackson had the wardrobe malfunction during the halftime show, and we saw a little bit of her nipple. Now, if Carly Fiorina showed nipple at the debate tonight, she might get a boost in the polls.
What a great piece of advice. Your quick thoughts. I of course bought a Powerball ticket. I was smart because, Prim is only 45 minutes from here, and you can drive down there. The line was a mile long. I drove actually into Arizona over the dam, and there was nobody there. So I got it for 10 draws, and I don't care if I win or not. I feel lucky enough. But I was so disheartened by the mile-long lines all across the country, and they looked like bread lines. That's why I made that reference at the top of the show. Any thoughts that you have on that?
Well, there are a couple things. One, there is the economic subtext here. One, this is a gigantic win for government because government generates huge amounts of revenue from these lottery sales. And in a sense, you could look at it as a regressive tax, but it's not really a tax because you don't go to jail. There's no enforcement if you don't pay for it like a tax. But in a sense, it's also playing on, and this is something that you wrote about on Facebook, it's playing on the utter lack of economic hopelessness that is built into the system right now. And, the world economy is going through a major, major shudder right now. This China thing is not going away. There was a really interesting story. This is earnings seasons, and although J.P. Morgan Chase, thanks to Jamie Dimon, had a $5 billion profit, that's in no small part because they've spent years leveraging all the free money that the Fed's been throwing into their hands to acquire all kinds of assets and hoard wealth. So they've got liquidity, but there's a study showing that 93% of the counties in America have not experienced any significant recovery from the Great Recession.
How many?
93% of the counties.
Oh my goodness gracious! You're kidding.
No, you're looking at where is the recovery? The recovery is here in the Bay Area because of all of the money that's flooded into unicorns. Those are those tech companies that have never had an initial public offering, have never been on the stock market, and many of them are pre-revenue, have never earned any revenue. You have, I think, 4 or 5 of the wealthiest counties in America are around the Beltway in Washington, D.C. because of all the government spending, particularly on defense and on internet.
Joe, quick question. This wonderful lady back east who's Ukrainian who reads her news in Russian and sends emails to me about what Putin says or what is going on that she wishes to forward to you because she is an absolute huge fan. She is a Joe Satilli junkie, just says, I love that man's mind. She sent something that said there was no transport going on in the oceans of merchandise and food by a couple of the biggest or the largest shipping companies of the world. Is that true?
Well, I would have to look that up, but I will tell you this. I have seen numerous data points showing that cargo shipping by plane is way down. Cargo shipping by ship is way down. Exports from China and actually trade, particularly between China and Russia, is collapsing. There is a deflationary pall hanging over the global economy. Now, you remember, John, from the 70s, and our family, we suffered through stagflation, and that's a stagnant economy. That means no economic growth, but in spite of no economic growth, you had rampant inflation where the cost of bread and milk and gas and everything was going up almost exponentially in the late 70s. That's what Carter was dealing with. Well, generally, when you have growth in the economy, you're going to have some inflation. what we have right now is we have no growth and we have deflation. The price of everything is going down. And why is that happening? Because there's no demand for anything. People are they're in fear, or they don't have the liquidity, the cash available to buy stuff, and the entire global economy is sort of going into stasis. The only part of consumer spending that really has seen any kind of growth over the last 4 or 5 years is in luxury goods. And if anything is going to tell you what's going on with income inequality and wealth inequality, it's the fact that luxury brands like Hermes and all the ones that you will find on Rodeo Boulevard in Beverly Hills, all of those brands, Christian Dior and whatnot, those are going through the roof. But, the price of gas is dropping. And even though people are paying less for gas and have more money in their pocket, you would think, because they're paying less for gas, they're not spending more. That tells you that's a systemic, I should say, problem in the economy.
Okay, then let's sort of get now to the recent polls that show Bernie Sanders moving ahead of Hillary Clinton. I must tell you, there was something on Facebook. People put all kinds of stuff on Facebook, and somebody put up a picture of some guy slapping a woman, and it said, press like or share if you think a man should never slap a woman. And so I just, smart ass, I wrote in the comment section, well, only if we exclude Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice. I must tell you, I will never forget over that woman's sadistic laugh when she heard about the murder of Gaddafi. So now Bernie is moving ahead. Do you think that Bernie will get the nomination? Will it be allowed?
Well, I figured we had to talk about this because both you and I spoke many, many weeks ago when Hillary came out of the Benghazi hearing, and the media kind of said, okay, well, she went through the 11 hours and she came through unscathed. So now we, the media, are basically going to ignore Bernie Sanders' campaign completely. And
They did.
They completely ignored it, and we're going to basically preemptively give her the crown of the nomination. And since then, she has slowly lost that lead that she built up, and it is amazing. And now you do have to ponder the possibility that Bernie could grab the nomination. It would be an amazing, amazing upset. The second time this has happened to her. Why? Well, people don't like her. Okay. I mean, I know that she would be the first female president, and that's a big thing. And there are many people that will vote on that issue, and I understand that. It makes a lot of sense to me. But there's another thing. There was an interesting story in the Wall Street Journal, I think 2 days ago. Maybe it came out in the afternoon, and I think I had it on the rundown yesterday, that both the GOP, the base of the GOP, and the base of the Democratic Party, they hate Wall Street. They hate Wall Street. And even though Wall Street has run away with all this money and they've gotten away with murder, it seems, people have not forgotten about 2008. And this movie, The Big Short, is out there, and people are watching The Big Short, and they're being reminded of how this whole system was rigged and how they got ripped off. And guess who are the candidates who have criticized Wall Street? Donald Trump, who has said that hedge fund managers are out of control and has said super PACs are running amok, and Bernie Sanders. And here's Hillary, who has proclaimed proudly her association with Wall Street in the debates, particularly after 9/11, and how Wall Street was so good for America after 9/11. And now she's had to deploy Chelsea Clinton, who, by the way, about 18 months ago bought a $10 million apartment in New York and is married. Her husband is basically a banker. So has deployed her to go out there and attack Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders is for a single-payer healthcare system, but disingenuously saying he wants to get rid of Medicare, he wants to get rid of Medicaid and the CHIP program and all these things. Yeah, he wants to get rid of it because he wants to go to a full single-payer healthcare system.
That's right.
So what's happened is as they've turned their attacks on Bernie Sanders, his small donation fundraising has gone through the roof, and he is now within the margin of error or ahead in Iowa, and has opened up a commanding lead in New Hampshire.
Well, not only does he have more contributors, he has more young people than all of them, including Trump, combined. And
That's right.
what Hillary or Trump will not be able to face if they face Bernie is that man talks about the facts of economic life in America.
That's right.
He talks about NAFTA. He talks about student loans. He talks about corruption. And his commercial is so effective. The others, including Trump's, are absolutely dreadful if you're just talking about show business and how to get in touch with somebody. Now, the rumor is that it will be a brokered convention and they'll bring in Biden. Because they'll be terrified of Bernie the socialist.
Well, you know, this is why Hillary would not get out. The reason for Hillary, if she loses here's the other thing. I've heard her campaign staff through, talking to reporters and articles, talk about the firewall of South Carolina. John, whenever you hear the word firewall, that they know something's amiss. That means they're already planning on losing Iowa. They're already planning on losing New Hampshire, and they're banking on winning South Carolina and going into the Super Tuesday states and winning in the South as being their take. But if Bernie and her start just dividing up delegates over time, and it does get to a broken convention, I guarantee you probably saw the comments. Joe Biden, he said about 7 days ago that he regrets every day his decision because he sees the opening is right there. Hillary is not. People don't want her.
Joe, again, it's the end of Hillary's time, and sadly it's the end of your time on my show, but it's not the end of your time on other people's show where they can hear you. So tell us, how can they get your News Vandal, and where can they hear you next and forever?
Okay, so to get the daily rundown, News Vandal rundown, just email me at info@newsvandal.com, or if you just go to newsvandal, NEWSVANDAL.com, it'll pop up, and then you can sign up right on my website very easily. I do Inside the Headlines. That's on KRUU-FM. If you type in KRUU-FM, it'll pop up. I do that tomorrow, every Friday. That's 2 p.m. Pacific. And then I'm on the Chuck Ocelli Effect every Tuesday at 6 p.m. That's on American Freedom Radio, Chuck Ocelli, or the Ocelli Effect. You can find it that way. But my favorite time is every other week spending it with you, John.
Oh, Joe, thank you so much. Well, you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you again soon. Talk to you even before we go on the air again, because
You're my spark of nature's fire. You're my sweet, complete desire. A sunny, 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 sunny. I love you.